Razor and his old crew thought the city had forgotten them, but his return ignited a deadly war between rival biker gangs, turning streets into battlegrounds and leaving no one alive who stood in his way. Razor's release from prison came on a gray morning, the kind of day that seemed to carry no promise. 10 years had passed since he last walked free, and the city that greeted him was no longer the same. He had once ruled the streets, his motorcycle club feared by rivals and respected by those who knew the cost of crossing him. But prison had stripped him of more than time, it had taken away his empire. The younger generation had risen, carving their own names into the asphalt. To them, Razor was nothing more than a legend from the past. A story told in hushed tones at bars and biker hangouts. Yet legends never truly die, and his sudden return sparked a ripple of unease across the city. As he stepped back into familiar streets, Razor could feel eyes watching. Old allies who had moved on kept their distance, unwilling to be tied to the man who once commanded chaos. Strangers glanced with recognition, whispering rumors that traveled faster than the engines of their bikes. Some said he had returned for revenge, others believed he had nothing left and was only looking for peace. Razor himself spoke little, keeping his thoughts guarded, his silence adding to the mystery. The two gangs that now ruled, the Iron Vultures and the Steel Fangs, took notice immediately. Both groups had grown powerful during his absence, feeding on territories he once controlled. The Vultures saw opportunity, believing Razor could lend them the kind of fear and respect they craved. The Fangs, however, viewed his presence as a threat, convinced he would try to reclaim what they had built. Neither side realized that Razor had no plan, at least not yet. He was still measuring the landscape, still deciding whether his return would be quiet or loud. At night, Razor roamed the city streets on a rebuilt motorcycle, the rumble of the engine echoing through alleys that remembered his name. Every corner seemed familiar yet changed, and with every ride, the tension thickened. The city felt like a powder keg, and his presence was the spark. He didn't need to lift a hand or make a move, the gangs did it for him, whispering, scheming, and preparing for what they believed was inevitable. Razor had only just returned, yet the balance of power had already begun to shift. Razor tried to keep a low profile, working quietly at a small repair shop on the outskirts of the city. He hoped that by staying busy, he could avoid the chaos that seemed to cling to his name. But the streets had a memory of their own, and whispers traveled faster than any biker could ride. The Iron Vultures began sending subtle messages, small hints that they wanted him on their side. Meanwhile, the Steel Fangs watched from the shadows, interpreting every glance, every visit to familiar streets as a potential threat. Razor had thought he could escape the tension, but it quickly became clear that the city had no intention of letting him remain neutral. A bar brawl one evening escalated quickly. What had started as a minor argument between two low-level members spiraled into fists, bottles, and the roar of engines outside. Razor was nowhere near the fight, yet by morning, both gangs were blaming him for instigating it. Rumors claimed he had secretly allied with one side to weaken the other, and his silence only made the story seem true. Each gang began moving against the other, small acts of sabotage and intimidation that left streets tense and patrols constant. Razor realized that staying passive was no longer an option. He was being pulled into a conflict whether he wanted it or not. The violence escalated over the following weeks. Ambushes became more frequent, targeting members of both gangs. Cars were set on fire, garages destroyed, and the city streets were no longer safe for anyone involved. Razor observed from the sidelines, studying the patterns of aggression. Each attack carried a signature, a hint at who might be behind it. But the truth was more complex than anyone suspected. Razor did not yet show his hand, but he quietly began to understand how he could manipulate the chaos to his advantage. Paranoia consumed both gangs. Every shadow was a potential spy, every motorcycle ride a possible trap. Razor's reputation had grown even more dangerous during his silence. The Iron Vultures and the Steel Fangs began hunting not only each other but also those they suspected of feeding information to the other side. Razor's name became a ghost that haunted their decisions, and with every misstep, the city edged closer to an all-out war. It was no longer a question of who started the fight, it was who would survive it. And Razor knew that survival required more than strength. It required patience, cunning, and timing. The city streets had become a battlefield. And Razor could feel the tension in every corner. One night, as he closed the repair shop, a sudden explosion ripped through the alley beside him. His workshop, his sanctuary, erupted in flames, sending shards of metal and wood into the air. Razor barely escaped, his body scorched and lungs burning from the smoke. The attack was a message, clear and deliberate. And it marked the point where suspicion turned into open aggression. The Iron Vultures and Steel Fangs now believed that Razor was taking sides, though neither knew which side. His very survival had become a threat, and the hunt for him intensified. With the city caught in chaos, Razor realized that he could no longer remain passive. Every street, every alley, and every abandoned warehouse became a chessboard. The Iron Vultures launched a raid on a Steel Fang's hideout, leaving destruction in their wake. In retaliation, the Steel Fangs targeted Vulture's territories, attacking anyone associated with them. The streets ran with the scent of gasoline, gunpowder, and fear. Razor observed the carnage silently, understanding that the war was consuming both sides while leaving him untouched. His absence from direct violence created confusion. Each side assumed he was orchestrating attacks, a ghost in the shadows manipulating events. Razor began using the chaos to his advantage. He spread misinformation subtly, planting false leads and rumors that directed suspicion toward minor players in each gang. Members were caught betraying their own leaders, convinced they were helping Razor, while the real architect of the turmoil remained unseen. Each ambush, each retaliation, further weakened the gangs. Razor's patience turned into a weapon, and the war spiraled out of control. Those who had once been loyal to him or feared him now found themselves on the battlefield, questioning every alliance, every decision, and every move. As days turned into weeks, the city became unrecognizable. Streets that were once alive with motorcycles and neon lights now echoed with silence between eruptions of violence. The Iron Vultures and Steel Fangs were both bleeding from within, their leaders suspicious, their members terrified. Razor, though battered from the initial explosion, moved like a shadow through the chaos. He didn't fire a single shot, yet the war continued to serve his purpose. The city had become his silent instrument, and he held the strings tightly, ready for the moment when the final pieces of his plan would fall into place. The battlefield was set, and Razor's patience was about to pay off in ways no one could predict. The weeks of chaos had left the city teetering on the edge of collapse. Razor moved quietly, a shadow among the ruins of his old stomping grounds, observing every misstep, every betrayal. Both gangs were unraveling, consumed by mistrust and bloodshed, yet they had no idea that the man they feared most was orchestrating the destruction from the sidelines. Razor's plan had shifted from survival to strategy. Each false lead he planted had pushed the Iron Vultures and Steel Fangs into striking out recklessly, turning their own strength into weakness. The Steel Fangs discovered a supposed traitor within their ranks, an illusion carefully crafted by Razor. Panic spread, trust crumbled, and they executed their own members without hesitation. Meanwhile, the Iron Vultures lost their leader in a calculated ambush that Razor had arranged, leaving the gang disoriented and leaderless. As the city burned with the echoes of engine roars and gunfire, Razor watched it all unfold with meticulous patience. Every twist of betrayal and bloodshed served a single purpose: to clear the path for his ultimate return to power. Razor's reputation had transformed from that of a feared biker to an almost mythical figure. Rumors of his cunning and invisibility spread faster than the violence on the streets. Members of both gangs whispered his name in fear, unsure if he was helping them or plotting their destruction. The chaos reached a point where even small skirmishes between minor members spiraled into deadly confrontations, and the city itself seemed to respond to the presence of a man no one could see, but everyone feared. Razor had become a master of manipulation, letting the gangs destroy themselves while keeping his own hands clean. Even the police began to sense the pattern. Though they could not grasp the mastermind behind the war, every lead pointed to different suspects, each more insignificant than Razor. And the deeper they dug, the more confused they became. Razor moved like a ghost through abandoned streets and hidden tunnels, ensuring his plan continued uninterrupted. By the time the fighting subsided, both gangs were fractured and vulnerable. Their leaders dead or missing, their members suspicious of one another. Razor had orchestrated the perfect storm of betrayal, fear, and destruction, leaving himself as the sole figure capable of claiming control over the city's underworld. The war had left the city in ruins, its streets littered with wrecked motorcycles, burned out garages, and shattered lives. Razor stood at the edge of it all, watching the remnants of the two gangs he had silently dismantled. The Iron Vultures were scattered, their leaders gone, their members hiding in fear or fleeing the city. The Steel Fangs had been completely destroyed from within, victims of paranoia, betrayal, and Razor's careful manipulation. The streets, once alive with the roar of engines and the tension of rivalry, were quiet now. But the silence carried the weight of countless untold deaths. Razor had achieved what few could imagine. He had survived the storm while orchestrating its destruction. Yet, the cost of victory was not lost on him. He had lost friends, allies, and the remnants of a world he once knew. The city itself seemed different, scarred by fire and bloodshed, with a lingering sense of unease in every alleyway. Razor knew that power had a price, and in his quest to reclaim control, the streets had paid it in full. He walked among the ruins, observing the empty hangouts and abandoned warehouses, places that had once defined the pulse of biker life. The law was closing in, piecing together fragments of the chaos that had erupted. Investigators followed trails of violence, attempting to understand the mastermind behind the citywide conflict. Razor had left no direct evidence of his involvement, only the aftermath of the gang's destruction. His manipulations had ensured that suspicion fell on others, keeping him in the shadows as the city tried to make sense of the carnage. The police could see the war, but they could not see the ghost who had orchestrated it. On a stormy night, Razor mounted his motorcycle for one final ride through the city he had reclaimed in chaos. The rain-slicked streets reflected neon lights, and the wind whipped against his face as if urging him onward. Engines roared in the distance, memories of the battles that had torn the city apart. He did not look back, did not hesitate. Whether he was leaving to rebuild his empire elsewhere, or riding toward an unknown fate, no one could follow him. Razor disappeared into the darkness, a lone figure whose name would echo in whispered fear and admiration long after the streets had healed. The city remained, scarred and wary, a reminder of the man who had returned to ignite a war that no one saw coming. Razor's story became legend, a biker whose return had not only unsettled rival gangs but had also rewritten the rules of power, survival, and fear. His shadow lingered everywhere, a silent warning that even in peace, the ghosts of the past could rise and dominate.